A couple of months ago, I bought a book that I have yet to unpack and put on the shelves. And the reason for that is because I wanted to record and share this momentous occasion with all of you. The time is finally here, so let's get to it. This is the book, Asterix Omnibus 5, containing books 13, 14, and 15 of the series. Let's go put this on the shelves. And right in here, and this finally, after literally decades, completes my collection of all the Asterix books done by both Goscinny and Uderzo. And now, finally, on For the Love of Comics, we can talk about Asterix. Let's get all of these out and head on over to the table. So here we have all of the Asterix adventures written by Rene Goscinny and drawn by Albert Uderzo and a couple of others, and I'll talk a little bit more about this series as we go through them one by one. If you don't know about Asterix or are not familiar with it, here's a very quick rundown. Asterix is a French series of comics published in the European album format on an annual basis from the 1960s to 1977 that were written by Rene Goscinny and drawn by Albert Uderzo. These stories are set at about 50 BCE and tell of the adventures of a group of French Gaulish villagers who resist the Roman Empire at the time of Julius Caesar. The hero of these stories is Asterix, a diminutive yet quick-witted warrior, and his best friend, the slower but lovable Obelix. The two of them are just a couple of the vast cast of colorful characters in supporting roles and recurring appearances, and their adventures in pre-Christian Europe and further are full of visual and textual gags. Asterix is a phenomenally popular comic series all over the world, rivaling the popularity of Tintin, and at a certain point of time, Goscinny and Uderzo, the creators of Asterix, were the best-selling French authors of all time. But unlike Tintin, which never continued as a series after Hergé, Asterix has been picked up and continued by first just the artist after the death of the writer Rene Goscinny, and later after the artist Uderzo's retirement by new writers and artists. The cultural significance of Asterix is perhaps the most deeply felt in Europe, but is also present in Asia, Australia, and probably everywhere outside of the United States, very similar to Tintin in many ways. In fact, the name of France's first satellite in space was A1 or Asterix. In this video, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'll give a very quick overview of all of the adventures that were written by Goscinny and drawn by Uderzo, their collaborations, and talk briefly, but not in great detail, about the stuff that came later, primarily because I didn't really enjoy most of them and haven't continued reading them, but the original 24 adventures are among my greatest childhood favorites, and I'm very excited to finally have been able to complete the collection as an adult. I'll also talk a little bit about these omnibus and why I chose to buy these books in these formats. And at the end of the video, I'll have some questions for you, both about the Asterix adventures and what else you'd like to see me do with these groups of stories on this channel. So let's dive right into the complete Asterix by Goscinny and Uderzo. So when I say this has been a collection decades in the making, I don't mean to say that I've been trying to collect these editions for decades. These are relatively new editions starting in 2007, these Omnibus 3-in-1 editions. But as a child, I had several of these single albums, all of which ended up looking like this, with very yellow, dirty paper and the pages falling apart because of the incredible amounts of time that they were reread. There were also many copies I owned that were borrowed by friends and never returned, and I never really had every single album in it because I would borrow and read from libraries and from friends as well. As a grown-up, I decided to upgrade my collection by buying new copies of these albums one by one, but I found them hard to get everything off. I was only 3 or 4 albums in and I could see that many of the others were missing, and then I got this very damaged copy and I found that them being cheap wasn't good enough for me to take this risk. That's when I was given as a present this book Asterix Omnibus, the first one, which contains the first 3 stories. And looking through it, I was quite impressed with the size being the original European album size, the printing quality, the color, the paper being white. All of it was exactly like these editions. And additionally, these contain 3 stories, but the price of one of these was the price of 2 of these. So you were getting 3 stories for the price of 2, which appealed to me from the point of view of value. And honestly, I like this sort of uniform cover design of these omnibus editions. I've never been overly enamored or romantically attached to the Asterix covers. They did vary. Some of them were literal scenes from the stories, like these 2. Some of the others were more abstract, like this. This baby is not this big in Asterix and Son. And I've never been absolutely in love with them the way I was with Tintin covers, for example. So I didn't mind getting them in this form. They were less fragile than these versions, and they were a bargain price-wise. Of course, once I had gotten a couple on heavy discount, I didn't want to pay full price for any of them. So I kept waiting and picking these up one by one in all different kinds of order when their prices would drop on sales or if I found a deal on them, which is why it's taken me a couple of years to get every single volume of these. But they're great editions. I like their design, and I really like that little thing where the spine makes for a picture when you put them all together, as we saw on the shelves. And because I've never been able to find full-size Asterix hardcovers, at least at prices that made sense or consistently across the series, so maybe I would find a couple of hardcovers, but I wouldn't find the others, this became a sort of no-brainer for me as the best way to collect this. I did want a box set of Asterix, and I did see that there was a box set available, but it was just these regular albums put into a cardboard box, which isn't quite the same thing as a special edition with the design. And also it was a sort of top opening box. I never like those. I like the boxes where you can draw them out and they're shelf friendly, and taking these things out from inside over the top wasn't just an appealing design. Plus, that box set is incredibly expensive, far more than what it would cost you to buy the books individually, so it really didn't appeal to me. I'm happy to say that these omnibuses are great. The first omnibus contains Asterix the Gaul, Asterix and the Golden Sickle, and Asterix and the Goths. These are not the 3 best Asterix stories because, like many series, you can see, especially with Asterix the Gaul, the creators just about finding their voice. The art style is a lot sketchier and less polished than what it would become. Characters don't look exactly like we'll become familiar with them and how they're famous for looking. Asterix and Obelix's appearance over here is very different from what they would be later, as are other characters. And the story itself is quite slight, but it does do its job of introducing us to this one village that resists Roman rule because of the secret magic potion that their druid Getafix brews for them. It gives them super strength and the ability to withstand the Romans. In this first adventure, the Romans have a spy infiltrate the village, learn the secret that it's a potion, which leads the Romans to capture the druid and try to force him to make the potion for them. Asterix breaks into the Roman camp and could easily have just rescued the druid and leave, but they decide to have some fun with the Romans, and that's really the rest of the story. It's not very complex and it's not very convoluted. It's a pretty standard set of gags of them messing around with the Romans, and while it's completely enjoyable, it isn't indicative of the heights this series will achieve. Asterix and the Golden Sickle presents an immediate upgrade in both the art, which is a lot more curvy, a lot more rounded than it was in the first adventure. The jokes are better, the puns are better, and the plot of them visiting Lutetia, which is Paris in 50 BC, in order to buy a new golden sickle for their druid, ends up becoming almost a noir third man type of story where the missing shopkeeper and them investigating what happened to him leads them deep into a web of corruption and racketeering. There's a lot of jokes about French people, about Gauls themselves, and you can see that this series knows how to poke fun at its central characters, not just at outsiders as other stories will have. And the third story, Asterix and the Goths, have for the first time them leave the country. They go into Germany because the Goths have captured Druid get a fix, and Asterix and Obelix are out to rescue him. Again, the art and plotting sees an upgrade, although we still aren't in the final form of these characters. There are a couple of things like Get a Fix saying, "I'm the greatest." He has more humility in other stories, and he doesn't come across quite in the same way as he does in this, but we can already see the characters as well as the creators' styles beginning to cement. These three stories are not the best Asterix stories. They get the job done in introducing the world and the characters to you, but they also show incredible improvement between each one. And by the time you've finished Asterix and the Goths, so that by the time you get onto volume 2, you've got a very clear idea of the nature and the tone of these stories. Volume 2 contains Asterix the Gladiator, Asterix and the Banquet, and Asterix and Cleopatra. And these are three terrific stories. This is from where I would say the Asterix series jumps up to become the series that people love. You have this introduction to some major characters that is there at the beginning of each album. So even if you didn't read the first three, you really wouldn't have any. These stories don't connect to each other in continuity, although they take place in the same world, so that you can read them standalone. You could definitely start reading Asterix from Asterix the Gladiator, although it would be a shame to miss some of the jokes in Golden Sickle and the Goths. Asterix and the Gaul, I think you can kind of skip unless you want to be a completionist, but from here on out, I think I find the whole series to be pretty essential. Asterix the Gladiator sees them travel to Rome and become gladiators in an effort to rescue their bard Cacophonix, who has been captured and gifted to Julius Caesar, who has then thrown him to the lions. Asterix and the Banquet is a tour of France in which the battle of egos between this small Gaulish village that resists Roman rule and the Romans takes on the form of a challenge. They say that we can go anywhere in Gaul. It doesn't matter what you Romans are doing. We can go anywhere and get food from every city, every major city in Gaul, and prepare a banquet from that. So this whole story is sort of an amazing race chase story in which the Romans are trying to prevent Asterix and Obelix from picking up the dishes from everywhere in France to prove that they can go wherever they want to. A lot of these stories, although they have a lot of cartoon beating up violence in them, a lot of these stories are really about battles of wits and battles of ego and battles of reputation. A lot of them have to do with the Gauls trying to prove to the Romans that their power is not absolute, and the Romans trying to keep the Gauls down, almost like PR mechanisms. It's a question of whose reputation is going to be challenged by whom. And Asterix and the Banquet is one of those first stories in which they really rub the Romans' noses in it. Asterix and Cleopatra was advertised as the greatest story ever drawn, and this is, I think, one of the first stories in which someone from outside comes to the Gaulish village for their help against the Romans. Over here, Cleopatra is pretty irritated at Julius Caesar declaring the Romans far superior to the Egyptians. She decides to build a monument that will prove him wrong, assigns it to someone who is friends with Druid Getafix, and comes to the village to ask them for help. Druid Getafix obviously takes Asterix and Obelix along with him to Egypt in order to help the Egyptians against the Romans. There are, like with almost every Asterix adventure, lots of cliches and stereotypes being used in jokes, but I have never found them offensive, even now returning to them as an adult, because they're so tongue-in-cheek and they're so warm and goofy that for the most, I mean, there are some exceptions, but for the most, this equal opportunity making fun of every nationality and every society in a light-hearted manner means that, like South Park or like The Simpsons, they do have a sort of no prisoners taken approach. So it prevents it from coming across as mean or xenophobic or racist, at least in my opinion. Some of the Asterix stories take place in their village, some of them they leave their village, and from these stories onwards they start sort of alternating. So Asterix and the Big Fight, Asterix in Britain, and Asterix and the Normans are the three stories in Omnibus 3. Asterix and the Big Fight sees a challenge from another Gaulish chief, but this one who's under the thumb or cooperating with the Romans, that chief challenges chief vital statistics of our hero's village to a fight. And this is like a big boxing match with the kind of smack talking and the reputational consequences involved, very similar to a Saturday or Sunday night fight. This story also takes Druid Getafix out of the picture, so says what would our heroes do without Druid Getafix and the magic potion, and has some interesting commentary on those people who don't resist and cooperate with the colonizers. Asterix in Britain is a great romp. This was one of my favorites as a kid, with jokes about warm beer and boiled food and rugby, arch ways of speaking, stiff upper lip, taking a break in the middle of the day for a cup of hot water, and another story in which other people who resist the Roman Empire turn to the Gauls for their help. The jokes, gags, and puns in Asterix in Britain are typical of the series, but also among some of the best. Asterix and the Norman sees the Vikings, who do not know the meaning of fear, travel to this village in order to find out the meaning of fear. They want to meet people who are afraid, and the Gauls are afraid of the sky falling on their heads. And this story may be less epic than others, but is a great one about characters bouncing off of each other's and individual personalities coming into conflict. Asterix Omnibus 4 contains Asterix the Legionary, Asterix and the Chieftain's Shield, and Asterix at the Olympic Games. Asterix the Legionary is the favorite Asterix adventure for many people I know, and for a very good reason. Asterix and Obelix join the Roman army in order to bring back the fiancée of someone in their village who's been conscripted, and all kinds of hijinks ensue in their little battalion, which is made up. It's quite a motley crew, and the effect that Asterix and Obelix have on this crew, and then the effect that this crew have on their Roman superiors, is some of the most laugh out loud, funny, and charming stuff in this whole series. Asterix and the Chieftain's Shield is another one of those ego-driven stories where the symbolic nature of the Gaulish leader's shield plays a very important role in establishing the pride of the Gauls in front of the Romans. This is a great story with a fantastic resolution, and also one of my favorites. Asterix at the Olympic Games sees Asterix and Obelix travel to take part in the games because they're insulted at not being included in them. In fact, this is one of the stories in which they declare themselves Roman so that they can get to compete in the games. This omnibus of mine is a little damaged, and I'll probably have to replace it. I picked this up for less than $5, and it helped me complete my collection, but now I really want a better copy. Asterix Omnibus 5 contains Asterix and the Cauldron, Asterix in Spain, and Asterix and the Roman Agent. Asterix and the Cauldron is another one of those road trip movies. In this one, he's trying to right a wrong and keep their reputation again from suffering by replacing a cauldron full of money. And money usually is not that big a part of Asterix stories, which makes this one a particularly interesting one. How he tries to make money and how he's stymied by it is a very interesting look at economics, and the way that people who don't really care about money will have to learn about things in order to beat other people at their game. Like many Asterix stories, it comes across as completely light and frothy, but does have that little thing in the background, this kind of thing that we've seen about colonialism, we've seen about war, even about slavery in other stories. Over here turns its attention to making money. Asterix in Spain sees him travel to Spain in order to return a kidnapped kid who's been kidnapped by the Romans in order to subjugate a proud Spanish chieftain. And that kid is rescued by Asterix and Obelix and then taken back to Spain. Again, they are helping some people resist the Romans, which is usually what unites many people with our with our Gaulish heroes. And this is just another excuse to have a lot of jokes about Spanish siestas and hot temperaments, invention of bullfighting and things like that. Very enjoyable, and that bratty little kid is just terrific. There's Asterix inventing bullfighting. And Asterix and the Roman Agent is another unusual Asterix story. This is one of those in which someone comes into the village rather than Asterix and Obelix leaving and traveling around. And this person has been sent by Julius Caesar to sow discord, which he does incredibly effectively. This shows you that even our heroes have some major chinks in their armor and can be manipulated, especially through the use of ego. Ego, pride, reputation are key things that show up in story after story of Asterix and is used over here fantastically. The moral of the story does end up being the fact that they need to stick together, and the way that they learn it and the things that they go through are just wonderfully done. When you have Machiavellian manipulator making you your worst enemy, I think it makes for very interesting storytelling, and that's a really interesting choice for the Asterix adventures in Asterix and the Roman Agent. Volume 6 contains Asterix in Switzerland, The Mansions of the Gods, and Asterix and the Laurel Wreath. Asterix in Switzerland is another one of those favorite adventures. Many people consider this their favorite Asterix adventure, and I can completely see why. You have fondues, you've got the Swiss vaults and banking system, you've got clocks, edelweiss jokes, and much more that garnish this quest story. The Mansions of the Gods is one of only 2 Asterix adventures that doesn't have Asterix in the title, at least in English. I think in French there are more. And this is another very unusual story. This is one of those that's set in the village without them leaving, and someone has actually been sent in to start tearing down trees and build a sort of apartment complex, one where they hope to move people from Rome, and that's the way they're going to get the Gauls subjugated, not through violence, but through gentrification. This is a terrific story about colonization and how, again, the manipulation of the Romans succeeds against the Gaulish villagers, using them against each other, playing them off against each other. There's also a very strong environmental message in this story, and it's definitely one of my personal favorites. Asterix and the Laurel Wreath sees our heroes try to get to Caesar's laurel wreath because their chief was goaded by his brother-in-law who was showing off, and the chief got goaded when he was drunk and said that I can feed you the laurel wreath, which is something your money can never buy. And now, of course, our heroes have to make that come true. Another story of hijinks that's built around an ego and a bet, and another one of my favorites. This volume 6 is really a crackerjack volume. I think, in fact, volume 4, 5, 6, most of these outside of the first volume I would consider all killer no filler type of collections. Omnibus 7 contains Asterix the Soothsayer, Asterix in Corsica, and Asterix and Caesar's Gift. The Soothsayer is another one of those people who comes to our hero's village and creates all kinds of troubles. Everyone would like to know what the future holds for them, but this person's quite a manipulator and manages to create a lot of trouble before finally the villagers do bind together against him. There's something quite heartwarming about how often our heroes find themselves at odds with each other before coming together at the end. Asterix in Corsica, another road trip adventure that gives you a bit of cliche, a little bit of stereotyping, and a whole bunch of shenanigans around very strong personalities, this time with the Romans versus the Corsicans. Asterix and Caesar's Gift sees a joke gifting of this village of resistors by Julius Caesar. He gives it to a useless soldier who trades the village's deed to an innkeeper, and then the innkeeper finds out that he actually doesn't own this village, so he decides to contest elections against the chief. Another story of internal strife and these people being pulled apart. And to me, it's always been impressive how writer Goscinny and artist Uderzo are able to get so many different situations of friction with this group of villagers. Another great set. Asterix and the Great Crossing, Obelix and Company, and Asterix in Belgium are the 3 books in the 8th omnibus volume. And these are the last 3 stories that were written by Goscinny. Asterix and the Great Crossing see them actually travel to America, initially starting by trying to get some fresh fish. And this might be one of those stories in which the cliches and the stereotypical representations may not have worked for me as well as they do for the other ones. The Native Americans over here are not treated any worse per se than many of the other foreigners or even Gauls that we have seen, but they are given a little bit of that noble savages sort of treatment that is problematic. It's not really one of my favorite stories, but I don't think it's absolutely offensive either. Obelix and Company, on the other hand, is another one of those stories of internal strife that is quite well done, I think, particularly because it takes the friction between Asterix and Obelix to new and unheard of levels. Asterix and Obelix usually have little fights and disagreements that they patch up very quickly. Over here, things go very far because Obelix is given this stature again by a meddlesome Roman interloper. And this is reminiscent of both the Roman agent and the Mansions of the Gods, where it's quite successful in creating a rift between people until right at the end when they are able to turn the tables. And Asterix in Belgium, the last album written by Goscinny, is a total return to form. Some great characters, some very funny gags, some of the best depictions of feasting in a series that's full of great feasts, and featuring a cameo from Thompson & Thompson of the Tintin comics. This is really all I meant to collect because these are the stories that I had grown up reading, although I did also have Asterix and the Great Divide and Asterix and Son as a child. These were not amongst my favorites. I didn't realize when I was young that they weren't written by Goscinny. It says very clearly written and illustrated by Albert Uderzo. I don't know why I didn't know that, but I think maybe it was because I just assumed it was Goscinny. But Asterix and the Great Divide, about a split in the village, it was never really one of my favorites. And Asterix and Son, which I think was the last Asterix I had read, was similarly a little underwhelming for me. But because they were part of my nostalgia and because I wanted to revisit them, and also because the spine picture of Asterix would be completed with this volume, I did go ahead and purchase Omnibus 9 as well. I hadn't planned to get the next two because I didn't enjoy Asterix and the Magic Carpet, which was surprising to me. It's Asterix travels to India. You would think that someone who loves Asterix so much and lives in India would be dying to read that. And I kind of was, but like the Great Crossing Native American depiction, I wasn't quite sure of the depiction of Indians over here. Perhaps I'm just being biased, but again, it was snake charmers and elephants and mystical, magical things, which were funny enough in a certain extent, but not really at the same level of the humor of other parts of the series. Asterix and the Secret Weapon and Asterix and Obelix All at Sea I had never read before I got it in this album, and I didn't care for them too much. Again, there wasn't anything absolutely problematic. They weren't horrible, but they just seem to not have the charm of the earlier stories. I'm not sure if this is because nostalgia colors my idea of the earlier stories or because they really aren't as good. And Asterix and the Actress, the class act and the falling sky was a complete surprise. This, again, does complete the image to a certain way on the spine, so I guess that's one of the reasons why I got this, but I had not read any of them and I thought I would give them a try. Asterix and the Actress and the last book, Asterix and the Falling Sky, I did not enjoy at all. There is a collection of short stories in the middle. Asterix and the class act are shorter pieces, and they were actually written by Goscinny before he passed away, so they were a little better, and I could tell now that Goscinny definitely makes a difference for me. There is another omnibus after this containing 3 other adventures that I've absolutely never read, but I haven't yet decided whether I should give it a shot. After Asterix and the Actress and the Falling Sky being as underwhelming as they were, I'm not really that enthusiastic, but everything else before that is just gold in my opinion. And I think unless you're very offended by any kind of stereotyping or any kind of caricaturing along the lines of nationality or region, I think most people can really enjoy them even today. Very often in my videos, I say I'm just scratching the surface, but nowhere has that been more true than in this one. Let me know in the comments below what more you'd like me to tackle about Asterix, about this wonderful series. Let me know what your favorites are. Let me know what you like or do not like. And tell me if you've read the news stories and are a fan of them, or if there are particular ones that I should be looking at. This has been For the Love of Comics. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.